Why did no one believe she belonged there? Maybe it was the way her boots looked too new or how her frame barely filled the uniform. But when Kira Thorne stepped off the bus at Fort Bennington, the late September heat wrapped around her like a dare, a silent challenge whispered from the ground itself. The asphalt shimmered. The air smelled of oil and dust. 18 years old, 5'4", carrying nothing but a small duffel and the kind of calm that unnerved louder people. The bus door closed behind her with a hiss. There was no turning back. Ahead, a drill sergeant's voice cut through the noise like a whip. She adjusted her duffel, shoulders squared. She knew what they saw, a kid, someone who should have been on her way to college, not stepping into basic combat training. But she wasn't there to prove them wrong. She was there to prove something to herself, and to the ghost of the man who'd taught her everything she knew about control, stillness, and survival. The formation yard baked under a merciless sky. 24 recruits shuffled into place, mostly men. A handful of women gathered off to one side, forming their own quiet alliance of nerves and caution. One of them glanced at Kira, scanning her up and down, then turned away. It didn't matter. Attention, friendship, approval, all of that had weight. And Kira had learned long ago that weight made you slower. The drill sergeant's voice boomed across the formation. "This is Delta Company. You belong to me now. You'll eat when I tell you to eat, sleep when I tell you to sleep, breathe when I tell you to breathe." His gaze swept over the recruits, sharp and dissecting. When his eyes locked on her, they stayed there for a heartbeat longer than anyone else. "Some of you think you know what it means to be a soldier," he said. "You don't. You know nothing." No reaction, no flinch. That was the first test, and she passed it without realizing how much it mattered. By nightfall, they were herded into the barracks, a long concrete building that reeked of disinfectant and the ghost of 1,000 nervous recruits. Kira chose the bunk closest to the latrine, the one nobody wanted. Corners were safer. You could see everyone from there. You could protect your back. A tall, broad-shouldered woman with a name tag reading Vickers stopped by, smirking. "You sure you're in the right place?" Kira looked up from stowing her duffel. "I'm sure." Vickers chuckled. "You look about 15. My little brother's bigger than you." "I'm 18, Kira replied simply. "Sure you are." The woman walked off, tossing over her shoulder, "Don't get too comfortable. You won't last a week." That night the barracks buzzed with the chaos of adjustment boots unlaced, jokes shouted across bunks, the metallic click of lockers slamming shut. Kira moved through it like smoke, unseen and unbothered. She'd been in noisy places before, the kind where staying quiet meant staying alive. By the time lights went out, she was already still, eyes open in the dark, the ceiling above her a blur of faint shadows. Somewhere down the hall, someone cried quietly into a pillow. Kira didn't. She stared into the darkness, replaying the voice of her grandfather, the one who'd taught her how to breathe between heartbeats. He used to say, "Stillness isn't the absence of motion, it's the mastery of it. Anyone can pull a trigger, few can wait for the right second." The week that followed hit like a storm. Morning PT at 4:30, push-ups, pull-ups, endless runs under a rising sun that burned away excuses. Recruits dropped out 3 gone by day 5, packing their duffels in silence. The rest carried on, chasing breath and pride in equal measure. Kira stayed in the middle of the pack, never first, never last. The safe zone. The place invisible people lived. But invisibility was temporary. On day 6, during the morning run, someone shouted from the front, "How's the kid holding up back there?" Laughter followed. Kira said nothing. Her breathing stayed steady, her pace even. The teasing rolled off her like rain on glass. Words were noise. She learned to survive past the noise. That night the noise changed tone. She sat on her bunk, cleaning the M4 carbine they'd been issued that afternoon. The weapon felt too familiar, not like something new, but like an extension of memory. Her hands moved automatically. Field strip, inspect, reassemble, function check. The rhythm of it was soothing, mechanical, perfect. Across the bay, a recruit named Tors watched her. "You've done that before," he said. "So has everyone here," she replied. "Not like that. You move like you've been doing it your whole life." Kira shrugged lightly. "I pay attention." Tors didn't push, but she could feel his eyes stay on her, not in suspicion but in curiosity. And that somehow was worse. Curiosity dug deeper. The next morning, the rifle range. Rows of recruits lined up in the early light, the smell of gun oil thick in the air. A range master named Sergeant Chun, short and compact, her face carved from calm authority, stepped forward. "Prone position, 100 meters, 10 rounds, basic competence. Don't try to impress me," she said. "Just don't embarrass yourselves." Vickers went first, confident, practiced. Her grouping was tight and the sergeant nodded approval. Others followed, some flinching, some jerking their rifles like the trigger was electric. The targets came back riddled with chaos. Then it was Kira's turn. She went prone. The ground was cool against her chest. The rifle settled into her shoulder like an old friend. Breath in, hold. The world narrowed until there was nothing but sight, target, and timing. She fired. Once, twice, 10 times in rhythm with her heartbeat. Each shot landed where it needed to be, not too perfect, not too sloppy, enough to be skill, not enough to raise alarms. Or so she thought. When the spotting scope came down, Sergeant Chun stared for too long. "Who trained you?" she asked. "My grandfather," Kira said softly. "He hunted." Chun's eyes flicked, calculating. "That's not hunting, that's precision." She marked something on her clipboard. "You're full of surprises, Thorn." The whispers started before lunch. That night, lying in her bunk, Kira touched the old photograph she kept in her duffel, a young man in jungle fatigues, his rifle slung low, eyes calm, expression unreadable. Thomas Thorn, her grandfather, the legend that history half remembered, he told her once. The hardest part of being good at something is knowing when to hide it. She understood now. Excellence drew light, and light made you visible. And visibility could kill you faster than any bullet. By week 3, invisibility was gone. In the training pit, under the blistering sun, recruits paired off for close-quarters combat. Drill Sergeant Holloway stood like a statue at the edge, his voice carrying the kind of weight that made silence mandatory. "Combat isn't about fairness," he barked. "It's about survival. You either adapt or you lose." Then his gaze found her. Thorn front and center. Every head turned. "Vickers," he said next, "you're up." The crowd's mood shifted instantly, excitement, anticipation, a little cruelty. Everyone knew what they expected. The small girl getting slammed into the dirt by the 6-foot woman who looked like she could bench press a truck. Holloway's hand dropped. "Begin." Vickers came in hard, all muscle and confidence, but confidence can't bend with momentum. Kira sidestepped, barely moving, redirecting force like water around a rock. Vickers hit the sand face first, the impact echoing across the pit. A few recruits laughed. Holloway didn't. Vickers scrambled up, angrier now, less careful. This time she fainted, dropped low for a leg takedown. Kira sprawled, her body moving on instinct, leverage over strength. One twist, one shift of weight, and her arm locked across Vickers' neck. Not enough to hurt, just enough to prove a point. Tap, tap. Submission. "Stop," Holloway ordered. The pit went quiet. Vickers pushed away, breathing hard, pride cracked down the middle. "Lucky," she muttered. "Maybe," Kira said. But luck had nothing to do with it. By lunchtime, everyone had heard. By nightfall, some had started avoiding her altogether. By week's end, even laughter near her bunk felt forced, the kind people used to hide fear. And yet, through all of it, Kira stayed silent. Not detached, just focused. She hadn't come to be liked. She'd come to endure. To test the part of herself that her grandfather had always said mattered more than talent, the part that refused to quit. As she cleaned her rifle that night, Tors sat beside her. "You're making people nervous," he said. She looked up. "I'm not doing anything." "That's the problem. You're doing everything too well. They don't know how to handle that." She didn't answer. There was nothing to say. People feared what they couldn't understand. When lights went out, the barracks settled into uneasy quiet. Outside, wind pushed through the pines. Kira lay awake again, listening to the soft breathing around her, the human symphony of exhaustion and doubt. She closed her eyes and let memory take her somewhere else, a winter field in Montana, frost crunching under boots, her grandfather beside her, whispering. The world won't always understand calm, but calm wins battles no one sees. And maybe that was what this was, a battle no one saw yet. Not against the enemy, but against every expectation she was born to defy. Why did Sergeant Holloway call her name again the next morning? Because even discipline has curiosity. Thorn ranged detail. Kira didn't ask questions, she just moved. The others watched her go, some with envy, some with quiet relief that it wasn't them. The rifle range stretched east, baked under noon sun, targets glinting like ghosts at the horizon. Holloway waited beside Range Master Chun, both framed against the blinding sky. "Today's different," Chun said. "Moving targets, you'll shoot in rotation. Accuracy and adjustment, nothing fancy." Kira nodded, but inside something tightened. She knew moving meant exposure, not of position, but of skill. The kind that no longer fit inside the story she was trying to tell about herself. Just another recruit, average, learning. The first shooters went wild. Paint rounds peppered the dirt, small clouds rising with every miss. Chun's tone never changed. Approval, disappointment, all measured in neutral syllables. When Kira's turn came, Holloway folded his arms. "Show me control," he said. The wind tugged at her sleeve. She let it speak before she did. Breath, stillness, calculation. Targets rolled left, then right, mechanical silhouettes gliding at different speeds. She squeezed the trigger 10 times, no hesitation, no correction afterward. The range echoed in neat rhythm, like punctuation marks to a silent sentence only she understood. "Cease fire." Chun lifted binoculars, her mouth barely moved. 10 hits, moving sequence. She looked down the line. "Who trained you, Thorn?" Kira gave the same answer she always did. "My grandfather." It hung between them like a truth half told. That evening the whispers grew teeth. By lights out she'd earned a new title she never asked for, the Montana Ghost. It slid through bunks in low voices. She never misses, she never sweats, she never blinks. The mythology was already building, and myths, she knew, could kill faster than bullets. During the next week, the lessons changed from physical to mental. Classroom hours on map reading, radio codes, survival planning. The kind of work where patience mattered more than muscle. Kira excelled quietly. Every answer correct, every chart memorized, every compass bearing perfect. But perfection isolates. Each time her score appeared on the wall, distance formed around her like a force field. Vickers still led her pack of loyal shadows, their laughter loud whenever Kira passed. Yet there was a strain in it now, an edge born not of confidence but of defense. Mockery had become their armor. One night after lights out, a boot thudded against Kira's bunk. "Hey, Ghost," a voice whispered, half laughing. "Maybe you can shoot dreams too." More laughter than silence. Kira said nothing. Silence, properly used, was a weapon sharper than any blade. 2 days later, the company assembled in the sand pit again. Hand-to-hand drills. Sweat, grit, and adrenaline. Holloway's voice rolled over them. "Technique matters less than will, size less than heart. We'll see who's got either." When her name came up, nobody cheered. They just waited. Her opponent was Vickers this time, but a stocky man named Dunor, former linebacker, grinned like a challenge coin. He swung first, fast and heavy. She slipped under the strike, pivoted, used his weight against him. The thud when he hit the sand made the watching recruits flinch. Holloway stepped closer, eyes narrow. Again. They reset, same result. Again, same result. Finally he waved her off. Enough. Dunor rolled to his knees, disbelief painted across his face. "She ain't normal," he muttered, And that was the problem, he was right. Tors found her at dinner. You keep this up, you'll be teaching the instructors by graduation. Or I'll be gone before it, she said. Why'd you join anyway? Kira paused, because somebody had to finish what someone else started. He didn't press. Maybe he heard the truth she didn't say out loud, that her grandfather's ghost sat at every table with her. By week 5, Delta Company prepared for its first field exercise, a mock engagement against an older unit, Charlie Company, experience versus youth. Everyone buzzed with nerves. For Kira, nerves turned into focus. She, grown up hunting in terrain harsher than any army training ground. The woods didn't scare her. People did. Dunor, self-appointed leader, barked orders. We go hard and fast, shock 'em before they know we're there. Kira studied the map. The terrain told a different story: ambush points, wind channels, blind ridges. If we push too fast, we'll expose ourselves on the east slope, she said quietly. Dunor snorted. Stick to shooting paper, Ghost. Leave tactics to the men. Tors gave her a look that said ignore him. She did. The sun bled through treetops when the exercise began. Within minutes, paint rounds whistled from hidden positions. Tors went down first, yellow splatter across his vest, eliminated. Dunor, cursed, opened up blindly toward the tree line. Walsh joined him. Their magazines emptied into shadows. Kira dropped prone behind a fallen log. She let the noise fade into information, the pattern of shots, the pause of reloads, the rhythm of confidence. 3 enemy shooters, concealment at 130. She saw the subtle movement of a muzzle between leaves. Inhale, exhale, press. The first silhouette dropped. Shift, adjust, second shot. Another, third, silence. When the whistle blew, the observers confirmed it. 3 hits, 3 kills. Word spread before they'd even left the range. By end of day, half the company was whispering about the girl who cleared a defense line with 3 rounds. Victory didn't feel like victory. It felt like exposure. That night she was summoned to Holloway's office. Inside stood Sergeant Chun and a man in officer's fatigues, Captain Reeves. Holloway gestured. Sit, Thorne. She sat spine straight, palms on her knees. Reeves opened a file. You're from Montana, no prior service, no records of competitive shooting, yet every instructor who's had you says the same thing: unnatural precision. Care to explain? My grandfather trained me. Reeves raised an eyebrow. Name? Thomas Thorne. Silence dropped like a pin grenade. Chun's eyes flicked to Holloway. He exhaled slowly. The ghost of Conan, he said under his breath. So the stories were true. Kira said nothing. Sometimes silence confirmed more than words. Holloway leaned back. You understand what that name means? Yes, drill sergeant. Then you know why this complicates things. You're not standard issue. The Army doesn't know what to do with you yet. 3 days later, orders came down. She would finish training with Delta but undergo advanced marksmanship evaluation after graduation. The whispers exploded. Special programs, classified units, nepotism. None of it mattered, but it all stuck. Isolation thickened. Even meals became quiet tests of endurance. Tors sat with her sometimes, loyal out of decency, not strategy. You ever get tired of being exceptional? He asked once. Excellence isn't the problem, she said. People's reaction to it is. Week 7. Advanced range evaluation. A private bus carried Kira and Chun to a remote hillside where wind carved invisible paths through the grass. Captain Reeves waited beside a long shooting platform lined with steel targets stretching to the horizon. This isn't about hitting, he said. It's about pressure. 20 targets, 10 minutes. Miss more than 3, you fail. Kira loaded the M110 sniper rifle. Heavier, steadier. Precision incarnate. Ready. Yes, sir. The clock started. 400 meters hit, 200 hit, 500, 550, 600 hit. Her heartbeat slowed, time elongated. The world shrank to glass and wind. 8 minutes in, she hadn't missed once. The final target blinked to life at 600 meters, half hidden by foliage. She adjusted for the gust kissing her cheek, pressed, and the target fell. The buzzer sounded. Reeves checked the monitor. 20 for 20, he said quietly. Most veterans can't do that. My grandfather taught me not to miss, she answered. Reeves studied her for a long moment. You realize this performance can't stay quiet. Some will want to promote you. Some will want to test you. Some will want to break you. You don't get to just serve anymore, Thorne. You're an asset now. That night she couldn't sleep. The barracks felt smaller, air heavier. Tors whispered from the bunk across the aisle. They're going to move you up, aren't they? Maybe. You want that. She thought about it. About the winters in Montana, the calm voice teaching her to breathe. About the price of being the best. Want has nothing to do with it, she said. Week 9 brought something worse than pressure, resentment. Isolation became harassment. Her boots went missing before inspection. Her pack straps loosened before a ruck march. Vickers' laughter echoed nearby, never directly tied, always implied. Kira endured. Endurance was power misunderstood. Tors urged her to fight back. They think you're untouchable, prove them right. That's what they want, she said. They want me angry, I won't give it to them. But patience isn't infinite. During NITOPS training in week 11, limits snapped. They were divided into small teams, Kira, Vickers, Walsh, and Brennan. Objective: navigate 2 miles through forest darkness, locate a supply cache, return before dawn. Vickers predictably took command. Straight line north, she ordered. Fastest route. Kira pointed to the map. The ridge line safer, easier footing in darkness. Nobody asked you. 30 minutes in, Walsh twisted his ankle. Brennan cursed. Vickers pressed on, pride over sense. Kira checked her compass. They were 800 meters off course. We need to adjust heading northeast, she said. Shut up, Vickers snapped. We keep north. We'll miss the objective. Better that than follow a know-it-all rookie. Walsh whispered, maybe we should listen. Quiet, Vickers barked, moving ahead. Kira watched her vanish into trees. She had a choice: follow failure or disobey and succeed. Her grandfather's words surfaced. Sometimes right and wrong look the same until the result decides. She turned to Walsh. Stay with them, I'll find the cache. That's insubordination. So be it. She slipped into the dark. The forest welcomed her like an old friend, wind through branches, soil breathing beneath boots. 20 minutes later, she found the supply box, its reflective tape glowing through night vision. Objective complete. On return, she found them still lost, frustration thick as fog. I found it, she said, showing the timestamp mark card. Vickers froze, face hard under green light. You left your team. You endangered it, Kira answered quietly. When they reached base, Holloway waited. He'd watched the GPS tracks, he already knew. In his office, silence weighed heavier than punishment. Vickers, he said, you're relieved of leadership, pride over mission unacceptable. Then to Kira, you completed the task but at a cost. Excellence without wisdom is failure in disguise. Outside, Vickers leaned close, voice a whisper edged with threat. You're alone. Sooner or later, that'll matter more than aim. Kira didn't answer. Maybe Vickers was right, but solitude had its uses. In solitude, no one distracted you from purpose. The following week brought new orders, an inspection by officers from Fort Bragg, a showcase, demonstrations, future assignments decided by what happened on those ranges. The air buzzed with ambition. That night, Tors found her sitting under the stars, knees drawn up, rifle across her lap. You ready for tomorrow? I don't know, she said. He spent his life hiding after the war. Maybe he trained me so I wouldn't have to. Then don't hide. Morning arrived clear and cold. The sky sharp enough to cut. Visiting officers lined the observation platform. Among them, Colonel Ashford, gray-haired, calm, eyes that saw too much. Kira performed the early drills with precision but restraint. She didn't want spectacle until the long-range event. 5 targets, 400 to 800 meters, 90 seconds. The range whispered with expectation. One recruit hit 3, another 4. Patterson, the best shot so far, hit all 5. Applause followed. Then Kira stepped up. Chun's stopwatch clicked. Kira's breathing slowed. 400 hit, 500 hit, 600 hit, 700 hit. The final 800-meter target waited, a small gray smudge at the edge of the world. 30 seconds left. She read the wind, the light, the heartbeat in her own ears. Exhale. Fire. The metal ping echoed like destiny acknowledging itself. 5 for 5. Faster than Patterson, cleaner than anyone. Ashford stood. "Private Thorne," he said, voice carrying across the stunned field. "That was exceptional. Rare. And rare carries responsibility." She listened, still prone, rifle cooling against her cheek. "You'll have choices now," he continued. "You can fade into the crowd, or you can step into the light and pay the price that comes with it." Kira rose, saluted. "I'll take the light, sir." The murmurs spread through the ranks like wildfire. The moment a legend quietly began. What happens when talent turns into a spotlight you can't escape? For Kira Thorne, that question became her daily battlefield. After the demonstration, the base never felt the same. The quiet corners she once hid in now followed her everywhere. Every corridor echoed with whispers of the prodigy, the ghost's granddaughter, the girl who never missed. Admiration mixed with envy, and both carried weight. Fort Bennington had seen sharpshooters before, but not like her. Not at 18. Not with eyes that seemed to study the world the way a scope studied distance, calm, exact, unflinching. Captain Reeves summoned her 3 days later. His office was sterile, walls lined with maps, mission reports, and framed medals that felt like both warnings and rewards. He didn't look up from his desk when she entered. "Sit down, Thorne." She did. He flipped open a file, fingers tracing her training results like they were coordinates. "You're being reassigned," he said finally. "Advanced reconnaissance evaluation. 2 weeks at Fort Bragg. Special selection." Her pulse didn't quicken, but something inside her shifted, a slow turning of gears that didn't stop once they began. "Voluntary?" she asked. He looked at her then, really looked. "Nothing about you has been voluntary since you hit that last target." There was no malice in his tone, just truth. The plane to North Carolina cut through night clouds like a blade. Outside the window, lightning flashed in silence, distant, unreachable. Inside, Kira sat alone near the back, listening to the engine hum. Across the aisle, a soldier in special operations fatigues leaned her way. "You the Thorne girl?" he asked. She nodded once. He smiled faintly. "Heard stories, thought they were exaggerated." "Most stories are." He chuckled. "Let's hope you live up to this one." She didn't answer, because living up to it wasn't the goal, surviving it was. When they landed, the night was still. Fort Bragg was different, colder, quieter, less forgiving. Training here wasn't about proving worth. It was about seeing who could disappear without being missed. Their instructor, Major Rowan, looked nothing like the shouting caricature of drill sergeants. He spoke softly, his voice carrying more authority than any scream. "You're here because someone believes you can do what most can't. That belief might be wrong. Let's find out." The first test was isolation. 3 days in the wilderness. No GPS, no radio. A map, a compass, and silence. They dropped her in the Carolina woods before dawn, mist curling low across the undergrowth. The air smelled of pine and distance. She adjusted her pack and listened, the soft rhythm of her own breath against the hum of the world. This wasn't punishment. It was home. It reminded her of Montana winters, of her grandfather's voice breaking quiet with soft instruction. "Listen before you move," he used to say. "The forest tells you where it wants you to go." By nightfall, she covered 9 miles, avoiding trails, reading terrain through instinct and memory. When darkness swallowed the woods, she didn't light a fire. She just sat, watching the stars leak through tree branches like fragments of lost time. On the second day, rain arrived. Cold, relentless, cleansing. By the third, fatigue became her only companion, but she didn't fight it. She let it flow through her, understanding the line between exhaustion and surrender. When she returned to base, soaked and hollow-eyed, Rowan waited. He said nothing at first, just watched her unload her gear with practiced calm. "You didn't get lost," he said. "No, sir." "You didn't signal." "No, sir." "You didn't need to." She shook her head once. He smiled slightly. "Good." The second phase was marksmanship under pressure. Not standard shooting, movement, distance, time limits and distractions that tested more than aim. Kira stood on the open range as a helicopter thundered overhead, wind slapping her face. Targets popped up and vanished faster than her breath cycles. She fired, reloaded, fired again. When the range fell silent, every target had dropped. The timer still had 8 seconds left. Rowan didn't clap, he didn't praise. He only said, "Do you know what the hardest part of being that good is?" She shook her head. "Convincing others it's not luck." That night in the mess hall, she sat across from a man who looked too old to still be in training, maybe mid-30s, with haunted eyes and scars that didn't belong to accidents. He stirred his coffee absently before speaking. "They say you're Thorne's granddaughter," he said. She hesitated. "You knew him." "Knew of him, the ghost of Conan, Vietnam legend. They say he made a shot no one else could make, then disappeared." She lowered her gaze. "He didn't disappear, he came home, he just didn't belong anymore." The man studied her for a long time, then said quietly, "Neither did most of us." His name was Mason, former ranger, now part of something less defined, something whispered about as shadow program. She didn't ask what that meant. She learned that some truths came with expiration dates. Before dawn the next morning, Mason met her at the range. "You ever fired from a helicopter?" "No." He nodded toward the US-60 warming up nearby. "Today's your chance." They took off, the world dropping away beneath them. Mason handed her a modified rifle, the kind with suppressor and adjustable optics. "Target on the ridge half a mile out. You've got one shot before we bank." The aircraft tilted slightly, wind roaring through the open door. Her hair whipped across her face. She steadied her breathing, let her body find equilibrium in chaos. The scope locked onto the distant target, a steel plate barely visible through the blur. 3, 2, 1. The shot cracked and vanished into wind. A heartbeat later, the target rang faint, perfect. Mason whistled low. "He wasn't lying about you." But Kira wasn't smiling, because she remembered her grandfather's words, said long ago in a Montana winter. "Hitting the target isn't the point. Understanding the cost is." Later that week, she was called into Rowan's office. The man didn't waste words. "Thorne, Command wants you to join a specialized assignment group, long-range overwatch, high-value surveillance. Non-combat, mostly observation. Are you ready for that?" She hesitated. "Observation," she repeated softly. Rowan's eyes narrowed. "Problem." She looked down at her hands. "Observation turns you into a ghost before you die." Rowan didn't respond right away. Then he said, "That's exactly why you're suited for it." The months that followed blurred into mission prep. Training in foreign recognition, topography, encryption. A language crash course in Dari and Pashto. The hints were clear: Afghanistan, maybe Pakistan. Somewhere she'd never been, but her grandfather had once described in hushed tones, long before she understood what regret sounded like in a man's voice. Her body grew stronger, but her thoughts grew heavier. Every night she'd lie awake in the barracks, staring at the faint cracks in the ceiling, wondering what she was becoming. Discipline made her sharper, Isolation made her cold. And yet beneath it all, a question haunted her. What happens when stillness stops being peace and starts being emptiness? Mason noticed. "You think too much," he said one evening during night drills. "It's better than feeling too much." He laughed quietly. "You say that like you can choose." "Can't I?" He shook his head. "No one who's ever taken a life gets to choose what they feel. It chooses you." His words stayed long after he left. Deployment came in silence. No ceremony, no goodbyes. Just orders sealed in a manila envelope, names redacted, coordinates classified. She boarded the transport jet with 8 others, Mason among them, and the hum of engines drowned everything else. Over the Hindu Kush, dawn bled through the clouds. Below, the mountains stretched like sleeping giants, ridges carved by centuries of war. When the ramp opened, hot air hit her face, dry, foreign, heavy with dust and memory. She was in Kandahar now. Their base was minimal, a joint compound tucked between barren hills, surrounded by wire and watchtowers. Life here operated between alert and exhaustion. You learned not to count days. You counted moments when silence meant safety. Mason briefed her under a canvas awning. "We're overwatch for Convoy Alpha. Civilian engineers moving through Red Valley. Intel says nothing unusual, but things happen." Kira nodded. He looked at her. "You ever been under fire?" "No." "Then remember this, it's not the noise that kills you, it's the hesitation." The morning of the mission arrived too bright. Convoy Alpha rolled out in a line of armored trucks, engines humming through the dust. Kira rode in the lead vehicle, rifle across her lap, scanning the endless tan horizon. Mason sat beside her, map in hand. Halfway through the pass, the radio crackled static first, then a voice. "Possible heat signature ahead, 200 meters, North Ridge." Mason's eyes met hers. "Take it." She climbed to the turret hatch, the rifle already braced. The sun flared off her scope. A shimmer of movement flickered against rock, too still, too intentional. She focused, breath slow. A man crouched beside an object half buried in sand. Wires, movement, improvised device. She exhaled once, pulled the trigger. The world went silent before the echo came. Then dust, then screams, then commands shouting over the radio. The convoy stopped, soldiers scattering for cover. Mason grabbed her shoulder, eyes wide. "You just saved 30 lives," he said. But she didn't feel like a savior. The shot replayed in her mind, slowed down, the recoil, the fall, the stillness after. She'd done what she was trained to do, what she was born to do. And yet, all she could think about was the face, the brief flicker of confusion before the body went still. That night, sitting alone in the watchtower, the desert stretched endless and empty before her. Wind howled through broken fences. She whispered to the dark, "Grandpa, how many times did you tell yourself it was necessary before it finally sounded true?" The stars gave no answer. They never did. But somewhere deep inside, a quiet voice reminded her, sometimes doing what's right doesn't feel right at all. It just saves someone else's tomorrow. And for now, that had to be enough. The morning after the convoy ambush, the desert looked unchanged. Same ridges, same wind, same sun. Only the people were different. The engineers moved slower, soldiers spoke quieter. Gratitude hid behind avoidance. No one quite knew how to thank the sniper who just ended a life to save theirs. Mason found her cleaning her rifle beneath the awning, movements precise, expression unreadable. "You did good work," he said. She didn't look up. Good and right aren't always the same. He crouched beside her, lowering his voice. "You're going to have to make peace with both. Out here, right doesn't survive without good aim." The words were meant as comfort, but they settled in her like sand in a wound. 2 days later, command called her in. A narrow room, a flickering fan, and a major she'd never met. "Private Thorne," he began, "HQ has reviewed your engagement footage. They're authorizing a temporary field promotion. You'll operate as Overwatch for Task Delta, classified routes, live intel feed. His tone softened. You've proven you can handle pressure, don't prove otherwise. She saluted, left the room, and stood outside in the burning light until her shadow blurred. Promotion didn't feel like achievement. It felt like another lock clicking shut. That night Mason joined her on the tower platform, both staring toward the dark horizon. "They're moving you up fast," he said. "Fast breaks things," she replied. "Sometimes breaking's the point." He handed her a small, worn patch, his old Ranger tab. "You'll need a reminder that people bleed for more than orders." She turned it in her fingers, rough embroidery scratching her skin. "Why give it to me?" "Because I don't need to remember anymore." He left before she could answer. The wind swallowed everything else. The next mission came at dawn, a local informant pickup, low visibility, high risk. Kira's team positioned on a rocky overlook, watching a dirt road snake through the valley. Below, an Afghan interpreter named Navid paced beside a white truck, nerves visible in every movement. Through her scope, Kira saw what he couldn't, heat signatures flickering along the ridge opposite theirs. 4, maybe 5, she radioed Mason. "Multiple contacts, distance 700 meters. Copy, hold fire until ID confirmed." But confirmation rarely came fast enough. One of the figures raised a weapon. The interpreter froze, unsure which side the silence favored. Kira's finger tightened. She hesitated one heartbeat too long. The shot came from the other side. Navi dropped. "Contact," Mason shouted. Gunfire erupted. Kira returned 2 rounds, precise, controlled. Targets fell. The firefight lasted 90 seconds, maybe less. When dust settled, the truck smoked and Navid's body lay half-covered in sand. She descended the ridge alone, ignoring the radio. Kneeling beside him, she pressed 2 fingers to his neck. Nothing. His eyes were still open, confusion frozen between breaths. Mason caught up. "We had no choice." She whispered, "I did." Back at base, reports framed it as a success. Threat neutralized, ambush prevented, 1 friendly casualty. But paperwork couldn't translate the sound of a body hitting ground. That night she sat at the small desk in her tent and opened her grandfather's photo again. For the first time, she spoke aloud. "I hesitated, you wouldn't have." The desert wind answered with dust. Weeks passed, missions blurred. Each operation carved another quiet scar into her. Locals whispered her codename, now Sadef, the Silent Stone. She became both shield and rumor. But inside, fractures widened. One evening, Mason found her staring at the ridge line long after sunset. "You haven't slept in 2 days," he said. "Sleep slows reaction time." "So does guilt." She looked at him, then really looked. "What's the difference?" He sighed. "One you carry, the other carries you." She almost smiled. "Then I guess I'm being carried." The next mission broke the rhythm. A humanitarian convoy, simple escort, supposedly safe. Yet command insisted on sniper overwatch. Kira and Mason took position on a cliff overlooking a narrow canyon. Below, trucks rumbled through the dust. The radio crackled with calm monotony until a sudden, sharp voice cut in. "Alpha 2, we've got movement east slope." Kira swung her scope. A child, maybe 10, running down the ridge, arms waving. Behind him, a man emerged carrying something metallic, long, thin, angled wrong for peace. "Weapon," she muttered. "Clear line?" Mason asked. "Not yet, the kid's too close." She tracked the man, waiting for separation. Seconds bled away. Then the child tripped, falling forward. The man raised the weapon, RPG tube, unmistakable. She fired. The man fell. The child didn't move. The explosion that followed wasn't from her bullet. It was the man's trigger half pulled before he died. The blast rolled through the canyon, flipping the lead truck, fire blooming like dawn gone wrong. Screams filled the comms. Dust swallowed visibility. Kira froze, every instinct screaming move, but her limbs refused. Mason grabbed her shoulder. "We need to get down there." They reached the convoy minutes later. Smoke, chaos, medics shouting. The child lay 20 meters from the blast, alive but burned, crying out for someone who wasn't there. Kira knelt beside him, removed her gloves and pressed a water bottle to his lips. He looked at her through tears and whispered a word she didn't understand, then stopped breathing. When they returned to base, command called it a victory again. Major strike averted, civilian casualties minimal. But in the tense stillness, Kira washed blood from her hands until the water turned pink, then clear, then pink again. It never looked clean. Mason stood in the doorway. "If you keep doing that, you'll disappear." She didn't look up. Maybe that's the point. Days later, she received transfer orders. A new assignment, solo overwatch for intelligence operations near Jalalabad. Mason protested, but hierarchy didn't care for sentiment. Before she left, he gave her the Ranger tab again. "In case you forget what this started for." She tucked it into her vest pocket. "What if I already have?" "Then find something else to remember." The helicopter lifted off at dusk. The base shrank beneath her, a cluster of lights swallowed by desert. She watched until they vanished. Jalalabad base was smaller, quieter. Her mission: observe a compound suspected of harboring an arms broker. 3 days of surveillance, 0 engagement unless ordered. Simple, boring, perfect. The first 2 days passed in monotony, heat by day, chill by night, wind constant. She logged movement, photographed entries, reported nothing unusual. On the third night, movement changed. A truck arrived late, lights off. Men unloaded crates, each marked with foreign lettering. She zoomed in, adjusting for distance, then froze. Inside one crate, metallic glint, a partial serial number. U.S. manufacture. Weapons meant for Allied forces. Sold, traded, or stolen. She radioed command, static, then silence. For 30 minutes, no response. She waited, heart steady, eyes on the target. Finally, faint crackle. Thorn, negative engagement, maintain observation. Her thumb hovered over the transmit button. "Sir, they're moving the cargo. If it crosses the border, it's gone." "Negative, repeat, hold position." She lowered the mic, breathing slow. Through her scope, one of the men turned, face illuminated briefly by a lantern. Recognition hit like recoil. The same man from the convoy ambush weeks ago, the one she'd shot, or someone who looked too much like him. Ghosts didn't resurrect, but guilt did. She adjusted her focus. It was him. The same scar, same gait, same impossible familiarity. She blinked hard, still there. "Command," she whispered. "Visual confirmation, target previously neutralized. Requesting clarification." Silence, then a voice she didn't recognize. "Thorn, extraction incoming. Do not engage, that's an order." Something in the tone, cold, rehearsed, made her stomach turn. Orders didn't usually sound like fear. Minutes later, headlights approached her position. Unmarked vehicles, not military. She felt it before she thought it. This isn't extraction. She dismantled her rifle, grabbed essentials, and moved downslope through scrub brush. Voices echoed behind, English mixed with static. She's gone uphill. No insignia, no unit call signs. Whoever they weren't supposed to find her alive. Adrenaline took over. She dropped prone behind rocks, scanning with night optics. 3 men advancing, infrared beams sweeping. She reached for her sidearm, exhaled. 1 step closer, 2. She fired twice, controlled, low, deterrent, not kill shots. The men scattered. She ran. Hours blurred into instinct, movement, concealment, direction by stars. When she finally stopped, dawn bled over the mountains. Her radio hissed with fragments. "Thorn compromised, do not return to base." She laughed once softly, too late. By evening, she reached an abandoned outpost. Cracked walls, sand-filled corridors. She barricaded the entrance and checked her gear. 1 magazine left. one water canteen, and one decision, call for help or vanish entirely. She chose the second, because help she'd learned came with consequences. That night she recorded a message on her field cam. Her voice was steady, stripped of rank. "If this reaches anyone who remembers me, tell them I didn't run. I just stopped following orders that stopped making sense. Tell Mason the world looks quieter from here. Tell Grandpa I finally understand what he meant. Stillness isn't peace. It's waiting." She switched off the recorder, leaned back against the wall, and let exhaustion settle like dust. Outside, the wind rose again, carrying the faint echo of distant engines. Maybe they'd find her. Maybe they wouldn't. Either way, she wasn't invisible anymore. She was part of the desert now, its witness, its secret, its silence. And somewhere far away, someone would hear her name and wonder if legends ever get tired of surviving. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply endures. Why do some soldiers vanish without a trace, and yet leave echoes louder than gunfire? Weeks passed. The report said Kira Thorne presumed dead in action. No body recovered, no transmission since her last field update. Command filed her name under operational loss, but some people didn't believe in ghosts staying buried. Mason didn't sleep much after the news. The night it came, he sat alone in the armory, her Ranger tab lying on the table beside an empty cup. The desert wind slipped through the cracks, carrying dust that felt like memory. He stared at the patch and whispered, "You don't just disappear, kid." He'd seen men break, vanish, or go dark for orders, but not her. Not the one who could outwait storms. Something didn't fit. He requested the mission file. Denied. Twice. Then he found a backdoor, old contact in logistics who owed him a favor. What he got wasn't a file but a redacted ghost. Timestamps missing, coordinates blacked out, signatures inconsistent. Someone had rewritten history while the ink was still wet. 200 miles east, beyond the official maps, Kira Thorne wasn't dead. Not yet. The outpost where she'd taken refuge still stood, half swallowed by sand. The first days were survival, rationing water, setting traps, staying invisible. She listened to intercepted radio chatter, bits of English Pashto code names. None spoke her name, but once faintly she caught it. Asset Thorne, neutralize if located. That word, asset, turned her stomach. She wasn't a person in their story anymore. She was evidence. She knew then what her grandfather must have known once. Survival after betrayal isn't living, it's testimony. At night, she wrote in her field notebook, careful block letters pressed into paper rough from dust. "If I make it out, truth goes first, me second." Back at Kandahar, Mason cornered Captain Reeves outside the operations tent. "You said she was compromised," Mason said. "That her mission failed, that she's gone." Reeves didn't flinch, because that's the file we received. "Who sent it?" "Washington." "Which division?" Reeves hesitated. That pause was enough. Mason leaned in. "She called in a duplicate contact, same face, same serial number, same ghost. You think she hallucinated that? Or maybe someone wanted her silence before she asked why the dead were walking." Reeves' voice dropped low. "You're treading close to things that burn careers." "Then light the match." Kira walked east for 5 nights before finding movement again, a cluster of tents beside an old well, locals, farmers maybe. She approached quietly, hands open, rifle slung low. A boy saw her first, ran shouting toward the camp. Within seconds, 3 men appeared with rifles raised. "I'm American," she said, "no harm." The eldest stepped forward, eyes wary but curious. "American soldier." She nodded, lost. He studied her, then motioned for her to follow. They fed her water and flatbread, offered a place by the fire. When she asked about the convoy that passed days earlier, the man's expression darkened. "Not soldiers," he said. "Traders, foreign, same men take from both sides. Arms dealers. the same faces from her scope. Before dawn, she thanked them and left, carrying one truth heavier than her pack. The system she served had traded morality for convenience. Somewhere up the chain, someone had been selling silence. Mason went digging deeper. Old mission rosters, cargo manifests, transfer reports. A pattern emerged: shipments marked, recovered, that never arrived, budgets redirected, names repeating across documents, contractors, private brokers, political donors. And at the center of every route, Jalalabad. He realized then what she must have stumbled onto. Her mission hadn't gone wrong by accident. It had gone wrong because it wasn't supposed to be witnessed. She'd seen too much. They'd sent men not to save her, but to erase her. He booked himself on the next supply flight east. Kira reached the border ridge on the 7th day. Beyond it lay Pakistan and maybe sanctuary. But the mountains weren't kind. Wind cut like blades. Her body ached with dehydration, her rifle heavier each hour. At dusk, she found shelter in an old shepherd's cave. Inside, she discovered a half-buried radio, broken but salvageable. For hours she worked by flashlight, fingers numb. Static answered first, then faint signal bleed. She tuned through channels until one caught her breath. Delta, Mason requesting verification. Repeat, verification of field loss Thorn, Kira. Her hand froze on the dial. She pressed the transmitter, heart pounding. This is Thorn, alive, coordinates. The line hissed, then cut to silence. She tried again. Nothing. The battery died, but someone had heard, maybe not clearly, but enough. Hope was dangerous, but necessary. She leaned back against the cave wall, laughing softly for the first time in weeks. Guess I'm still a problem, she whispered. At Kandahar, Mason stared at the comms monitor. The brief distortion lasted 2 seconds, a ghostly voice almost swallowed by static. But he knew it. He knew her cadence. He ran to Reeves' office. That was her. Reeves frowned. Could be interference. Could be her, Mason snapped. You can't act without confirmation. I don't need permission. By midnight, he'd stolen a jeep, 2 rations packs, and a map. He drove east into the mountains, chasing a frequency only his instincts recognized. 3 nights later, Kira woke to the sound of distant engines. She packed fast, moving out before sunrise. Whoever was coming, she couldn't tell if they were rescue or retrieval. She followed the ridge line until the valley widened below, then stopped. Vehicles, not military, black, 3 of them, men unloading cases. Through her scope, she saw faces again, familiar. One of them, the one she'd seen alive after death, was laughing, cigarette glowing. They were setting charges, not for defense, for erasure. She whispered into her broken radio. Hopping the universe still listened. If anyone's out there, they're burning the evidence, and maybe me with it. Then she saw him. Mason. Half a mile out, crouched behind rocks, scanning the same scene through binoculars. Relief hit so hard it felt like pain, but it lasted 1 second, because a man behind him raised a rifle. Kira didn't think she aimed, fired once, the attacker dropped. Mason spun, startled, then spotted her through the scope glare. He didn't smile, just nodded once, like they'd both been waiting for this intersection of fate and exhaustion. Gunfire erupted below. The dealers realized they were seen. Mason moved down the slope. Kira covered him. The firefight that followed wasn't cinematic, it was desperate, clumsy, survival stripped bare. Dust, shouts, the sound of truth refusing to stay buried. One of the men fled toward the trucks. Kira tracked him, recognized the scarred face again. She hesitated. He turned, weapon raised. She fired. He fell, this time for good. When the dust settled, Mason found her kneeling beside one of the crates. Inside, U.S. weapons, serials intact, evidence enough to damn half a dozen officials. He crouched beside her. You just exposed the reason you had to die. She looked at him. Then we don't die yet. They spent the night transmitting photos, coordinates, and proof to every secure channel they could hijack. Somewhere, someone would notice. Somewhere, justice might stir. At dawn, Mason tore open an MRE and handed her the bread. What now? She chewed slowly. We wait for consequences. Consequences came faster than hope. By noon, a helicopter approached unmarked. Kira and Mason ducked behind the rocks, watching it land near the burning trucks. Men in dark fatigue stepped out, scanning. Not search and rescue, retrieval. Kira whispered, "We can't outrun them." Mason checked his sidearm. "We can outlast them." They moved higher into the ridge, weaving through crevices until the sound faded. For 2 days they hid, sharing sips of water, watching drones hum like insects in the sky. On the third night, a storm rolled in, violent, cleansing. Lightning painted the peaks silver. As thunder drowned the world, Mason laughed softly. "You ever think maybe he trained you for this?" Kira nodded. "He said one day silence would save me. I just didn't think it'd be this loud." When morning came, the storm had buried their tracks. Helicopters were gone. For the first time, the air didn't taste like fear, only exhaustion. Mason looked toward the horizon. "We can make the border by tomorrow night." She glanced back at the valley, the smoke, the wreckage, the ghosts. "We already crossed it," she said. By the time they reached a NATO checkpoint, their story was part truth, part survival myth. The evidence drives they carried were enough to start investigations they'd never see the end of. Command debriefed them separately. Kira's statement was short. Mission compromised, orders inconsistent, chain of command unclear, objective achieved by accident, not design. She refused medals. She refused interviews. When they asked what kept her alive, she said, "Stillness." They didn't understand. They never did. Months later, back in Montana, snow fell over the valley where her grandfather once taught her to breathe between heartbeats. The world was quiet again, but not empty. She stood at the edge of the frozen field, rifle slung across her shoulder, eyes soft in the cold. Mason's letters came sometimes, short updates from a new posting. He always ended them the same way: "Keep breathing, ghost." She smiled at that name now, not as a legend but as a reminder. She was a ghost, yes, but one that chose to haunt truth, not hide from it. As dusk settled, she whispered to the wind, "You were right, Grandpa. Stillness wins battles no one sees, but sometimes it also saves the ones who don't deserve to be forgotten." The snow thickened. Somewhere far away, a file marked "Thorn, classified," sat buried in a drawer that would never open again. But stories have a way of breathing long after silence tries to smother them. And hers wasn't a legend. It was a lesson, carved into dust, blood, and the quiet courage of knowing when not to pull the trigger. Because sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply survives. 2 weeks after returning to the States, she sat in a cold, gray room somewhere in Virginia. No insignia, no flags, just one table, 2 chairs, and a single cup of coffee she hadn't touched. Across from her sat Colonel Ashford, the same man who once praised her precision at Fort Bennington. His hair was grayer now, his voice calmer, sharper. "I've read your report," he said. "It's unconventional." Kira didn't respond. He continued, "The evidence you and Sergeant Mason provided triggered 3 separate investigations. 2 of those names you exposed were senior officials. You understand what that means?" "Yes, sir." "It means you embarrass people with power." He leaned back. "You're being offered reassignment under a different name, different file. Protection technically. But if you'd prefer discharge, we can make that happen too." She stared at the untouched coffee. "Discharge?" He studied her a long moment. "You sure? You're a symbol now, a living headline. You could stay in and turn that into something." She met his eyes. "I didn't survive to be a headline." Ashford sighed, reached for a pen. "Then you're free, Miss Thorne, for whatever that word still means." Freedom sounded lighter than it felt. The cabin in Montana waited the same way mountains do, unmoved by absence, patient with return. The door creaked, the dust was thicker, the air smelled of pine and nostalgia. She unpacked slowly, setting her rifle by the wall, her boots by the fire, her grandfather's photo on the mantel. For the first time in months, no orders followed her movements, and that somehow was terrifying. That night, snow fell in silence. She sat by the fire, writing in the same field notebook she'd carried through deserts and storms. Stillness isn't the absence of noise. It's the discipline to hear what noise tries to hide. Outside, wolves howled across the ridge, haunting, mournful, alive. She envied them their purpose. Days turned into weeks. The rhythm of ordinary life was foreign: groceries, mail, small talk with the woman at the store who recognized her last name but didn't ask questions. The world moved on, as it always did. Wars fade faster than the people who fought them. She spent mornings hiking the old trails, evenings at the range behind the cabin. Shooting wasn't about accuracy anymore. It was meditation, a way to breathe, to anchor. Each pull of the trigger felt like confession. Still, the ghost stayed. Every night before sleep, she saw the convoy boy's face, the one she couldn't save. She'd whisper to the ceiling, "I'm sorry," and imagine the wind carrying it somewhere forgiveness still lived. One evening, a black SUV crawled up the dirt road. She knew before it stopped that it wasn't local. Mason stepped out, older, rougher, smiling the way soldiers do when they've seen too much and made peace with none of it. "Nice place," he said. "Remote, predictable, safe." She smirked. "You say that like it's a bad thing." He handed her an envelope, thick, official, unmarked. "They're done investigating, 2 indictments, 1 plea deal and 1 suicide." She didn't open it. "And you?" "I'm done too, leaving the service." "By choice." He laughed softly. "By theirs, too many questions, not enough loyalty." They sat on the porch, watching the snow turn blue under the fading light. For a while, neither spoke. Finally, he said, "They'll turn this into a story, you know. The girl who saw corruption, stood her ground, survived. You'll be a legend." She shook her head. "Legends are just excuses people use to avoid facing the truth. I don't want to be that." Mason studied her profile, the calm, the scars behind her stillness. "Then what do you want?" She thought about it. The sound of wind, the fire's crackle inside, the photo of her grandfather on the mantel. "To stop feeling like everything I did right came at the wrong cost." He nodded slowly. "That's the one war none of us win." Before he left, he set a small metal case on her porch. "For when you decide what peace looks like." Inside, after he drove away, she found a folded letter and a silver cartridge casing engraved with a single word: "Endure." Spring thawed the valley. The snow receded, revealing green beneath white. Kira began rebuilding, fixing the roof, clearing brush, planting a small garden behind the cabin. Her hands grew calloused again, but not from violence this time, from creation. Sometimes she'd drive into town, sit at the diner, listen to people talk about anything but war. It was a kind of healing, knowing life kept moving even when you didn't. But normalcy was fragile. One afternoon, a journalist found her. Young, polite, with the kind of restless curiosity that mistakes privacy for permission. "You're Kira Thorne, right? The sniper from the Jalalabad operation." Kira looked up from her coffee. "I'm not anything anymore." He smiled awkwardly. "I'm writing a piece about women in combat your story could inspire." She cut him off gently. "My story already cost enough people their peace. Leave it that way." He hesitated. "Don't you think people deserve to know the truth?" She stared out the window, at sunlight on glass, at people laughing over pie. "They wouldn't believe it if I told them." He left his card anyway. She never called. At night she still wrote. Not reports, not confessions, reflections, sentences that didn't need approval or clearance. Sometimes justice doesn't look like punishment. It looks like surviving without turning cruel. She kept writing until her hand cramped. Then she'd close the notebook and sit outside, listening to owls in the trees. One evening, lightning rolled across the distant mountains. She watched it silently, remembering the storm in the desert, the one that had buried her tracks. She whispered, "You saved me once. Do it again." The wind answered with rain, soft, cold, cleansing. Months passed. The scars of war faded into habit, but history, like aim, never truly misses its mark. One morning, an unmarked envelope arrived in her mailbox. Inside, a single photograph, her, taken weeks earlier, through a window. No note, no return address. She sat on the porch, studying it until the edges curled in her grip. Then she burned it in the fire pit. Smoke drifted upward, gray against blue. She didn't panic. She just said aloud, "If you're watching, you already know I'm not running." That night, she cleaned her rifle for the first time in months. Old rituals never died, they just waited for purpose. Days turned quiet again, but the air carried a different kind of weight, the kind that precedes confrontation or closure. She didn't know which was coming, only that both demanded the same thing: readiness. On the fifth night, the woods whispered movement. Not wildlife, rhythm too human. Two figures, maybe three. She turned off the lights, grabbed her rifle, positioned by the window. A silhouette appeared near the barn. Then a voice, low, careful, familiar. "Kira." "Mason." She lowered the rifle and stepped outside. He looked tired, eyes shadowed. "They're cleaning up loose ends," he said. "The ones we exposed, someone's erasing the trail." Her stomach turned. "Including us." He nodded. "Including us." "How long?" "Days, maybe hours." She didn't ask how he knew. He'd always known first. They packed quickly, essentials only. Before they left, she took one last look at the cabin. The garden half grown, the fire still burning. She whispered, "You were almost home." They drove through the night, headlights off, mountains turning into silhouettes. By dawn, they reached the Canadian border, cold air, pine forests stretching endless. Mason stopped the truck. "Once we cross, we disappear for good. No contact, no records. You ready for that?" She stared at the horizon. "I've been disappearing my whole life." He smiled sadly. "Then maybe this time it's on your terms." They crossed the border before sunrise. Behind them, the world they'd tried to expose folded itself back into silence. Ahead lay wilderness, unmarked, unforgiving, honest. Weeks later, deep in the Yukon forest, they built a small cabin by a river. No phones, no networks, just quiet and the sound of water against rock. Sometimes they spoke. Sometimes they didn't. Sometimes she'd wake before dawn, step outside, and watch fog rise off the river like breath leaving the earth. It wasn't peace exactly, but it was close enough. One morning, Mason found her sketching in the dirt with a stick, a circle with a cross through it. "Target?" he asked. "Memory," she said softly. He nodded. "You think anyone back there remembers us?" "Maybe," she said, "but remembering isn't the same as understanding." When summer came, she opened her notebook one last time and wrote, "There are wars that end in silence and wars that end in truth. I lived through both. The second one hurt less." She closed the book, placed it in a tin box, and buried it beneath the tree outside the cabin. That night they sat by the fire. Mason said, "If anyone ever finds that notebook." She smiled faintly. "Then maybe they'll finally believe the stories that were never meant to be told." He laughed. "And if they do, then they'll have to live with not knowing. That's punishment enough." The fire burned low. The stars spread wide. Somewhere, the river kept whispering secrets only the patient could hear. Kira stared into the flames and said quietly, "Maybe stillness isn't waiting anymore. Maybe it's acceptance." Mason nodded. "Maybe." The night swallowed their words, carrying them into a world that had already forgotten their names, but would never forget what they'd done. Because sometimes, silence doesn't hide the truth. It protects it. And sometimes dignity doesn't fight. It simply remains. What if peace isn't the end of war, but just the quiet between echoes? For nearly a year, the wilderness held its silence. Days folded into one another, misty mornings by the river, evenings by the fire, seasons blending until time became more feeling than fact. Kira Thorne had stopped counting months the day she stopped hearing helicopters. She and Mason built a rhythm: hunt, fix, maintain. He fished. She kept watch. Neither called it hiding. They called it surviving, because even ghosts had to eat. But some nights when the wind blew off the northern ridge, she still heard faint static in her dreams. Radio chatter, her name buried in white noise. Thorne asset terminated. She'd wake sweating, heart calm but fast. The kind of calm only soldiers know. The calm that means you're ready to die before you even think about living. Mason always knew when she'd had the dream. He'd hand her coffee without a word and let silence do the healing. They didn't talk about war anymore. Talking meant remembering, and remembering meant reliving. Still, the past had a way of finding new routes through the dark. The first sign came in spring. Mason went to the nearest town for supplies, 3 hours south. He was supposed to be back by nightfall. When darkness came, only the river returned. Kira waited until dawn before she started tracking. She followed tire marks down the muddy road, through pines heavy with fog. 10 miles out, the track stopped beside a rusted sign that once read Raven Point Lodge. There, half hidden in weeds, sat the truck, doors open, supplies gone, engine cold. She crouched beside it, touched the hood, still damp from rain, not long abandoned. Inside, no blood, no struggle, just an old map on the passenger seat folded neatly. A single word scrawled across it in charcoal: run. Her throat tightened, but not with panic, with recognition. That was Mason's handwriting. She packed within minutes: rifle, water, knife, notebook. The cabin, everything they'd built, stayed behind, door unlocked, fire still smoldering. She didn't say goodbye. Ghosts didn't need farewells. By midday, she was moving through the forest, following the trail she knew he would leave if he could. Bent grass here, broken twig there. A deliberate breadcrumb path meant only for eyes trained to notice. After 2 days, the trail ended at a clearing, flat ground, an old hunting post, and fresh tire tracks leading north. The smell of exhaust lingered. She crouched low, scanning the tree line. That's when she saw it: a small flash drive nailed to a tree, sealed in plastic. Inside, a single file: audio. She played it on her field recorder, Mason's voice crackling through static. "If you find this, it means they found me first. Don't come looking. There's more to this than we thought. Jalalabad wasn't about weapons, it was about people, transfers, names I shouldn't have seen. And they know you're alive, Kira. They've known for months. Stay invisible." Silence, then a final line, quieter: "If they reach you before this does, don't hesitate." The recording ended. She sat still for a long time, letting the cold seep through her gloves. When she finally stood, the decision had already been made. She wasn't running, she was hunting. 2 weeks later, she reached Vancouver under a borrowed identity. Her reflection in a store window looked like someone else entirely: hair shorter, eyes harder, skin thinner from months of wilderness. Inside her chest, the stillness had changed again. It wasn't survival now. It was purpose. She started digging. The flash drive Mason left wasn't empty after all. Hidden behind the audio file was a string of encrypted coordinates. When she mapped them, they formed a pattern: a supply chain that didn't exist on paper but connected defense contractors, humanitarian fronts, and one private security company, Borealis Dynamics. It was based out of Washington, D.C., officially harmless. Unofficially, the same company whose shipments she'd intercepted years ago, the ones that had nearly gotten her killed. And Mason had gone looking for them. Now he was gone. The trip south took days, buses and trucks stitched together by backroads. She slept in motels where no one asked names. carrying only a duffel and an old revolver she'd cleaned so often it shone like faith. When she reached D.C., it was raining. Cities always sounded different after war. Too many sirens, too much pretending. She rented a small room above a laundromat and spent nights watching the office building across the street, Borealis Dynamics HQ. Glass and steel, tall and quiet, guarded by polite security that didn't smile with their eyes. She'd been trained to study patterns, shift changes, routes, hand gestures, habits. Within days, she noticed one anomaly, an older man with a limp who always entered through the service door at midnight, stayed an hour, and left with no escort. Curiosity is what kills ghosts, but it also revives them. She followed him one night, keeping distance, blending with the rhythm of rain. He stopped behind a loading dock, pulled out his phone, made a call. Kira couldn't hear the words, but she saw the name that flashed on his screen as he hung up. Colonel Ashford. The man who'd discharged her, the one who'd promised freedom. It wasn't surprise that hit her first, it was disappointment. The kind that doesn't burn, it freezes. The next day, she broke into the old warehouse listed under Borealis's old subsidiary license. Inside, dust, silence, and boxes of paper files no one bothered to digitize. She worked through the night, flashlight clamped between her teeth. Most of it was logistics, but in one folder she found what she didn't want to. A file labeled Project STONFALL, containing her name. The documents weren't reports. They were transcripts, recordings of her debriefings, conversations, even private moments from Fort Bennington. Each line stamped Authorized Surveillance, Ashford. And then a note handwritten in the margin. Subject Thorn, potential liability. Monitor post-discharge. Neutralize if exposure risk persists. Her breath hitched. There it was, the truth, cold and bureaucratic. She wasn't just a soldier who stumbled into corruption. She'd been part of a contingency plan to clean it up and then clean her up. She dropped the folder and stepped back, heartbeat steady but sharp. For the first time since the desert, she felt fear that wasn't for her life but for her purpose. Because now, even surviving meant playing into their script. She whispered, "You don't get to write my ending." That night she sat on the edge of her motel bed, staring at Mason's cartridge casing. Endure. She turned it over in her palm, then set it down and opened her notebook. They tried to make me a weapon, then a warning. I'll settle for being the truth. She tore the page out, folded it, slipped it into her jacket pocket. Then she made a plan. 2 days later, Colonel Ashford received an unmarked envelope. Inside, photographs, screenshots of the Project Stonefall documents, and one line written across them in neat block letters. "You train me to hit what matters." When he looked up from the envelope, his office window reflected a silhouette across the street. He couldn't see her clearly, but he knew. He reached for the phone. "This is Ashford, we have a problem." Across the street, Kira Thorne walked away before the sirens started. Mason found her 3 nights later in a safe house outside Baltimore. He looked thinner, paler, but alive. "You didn't run," he said. "Neither did you. You sent them proof." "They sent me betrayal." He smiled wearily. "What now?" "Now," she said, "we finish it." He poured coffee, sat opposite her, voice low. "You realize they'll come after both of us." "They already did." "Then what's your endgame, Kira?" She paused. "Not revenge, exposure." He frowned. "That's suicide." "No, it's closure." They spent the next week gathering everything they had, documents, transmissions, the original Jalalabad evidence drive. Kira knew what the truth cost, but she also knew silence cost more. When the files were ready, she didn't send them to the media. She sent them to veterans she trusted, quiet men and women who still believed service meant sacrifice, not silence. Within 48 hours, leaks spread across defense networks. Names, contracts, shell companies. By the time the press caught up, the story had outgrown them both. Anonymous sources revealed a network of illegal arms trades tied to Borealis dynamics and officials inside the Pentagon. By the end of the week, arrests began. By the end of the month, Ashford resigned. But Kira didn't celebrate. She just packed. On their last night in the safe house, Mason asked, "You ever think about going public, letting people know what you did?" She shook her head. "Heroes make noise, I made silence." He smiled. "Maybe silence is louder." They drove north again at dawn the same way they'd come, past forests and rivers that didn't remember names. This time the world felt lighter, not healed, not fixed, but honest. When they reached the border, Mason looked at her. "What now?" She smiled faintly. "Now we rest, until someone else needs waking up." He nodded. "You think that'll ever end?" "No," she said, "but neither will we." Months later, back in the Yukon, snow fell again. The cabin still stood. The river still whispered. Mason sat carving wood near the fire. Kira watched the snow through the window, then whispered softly to herself, "You can't erase what's already endured." She picked up her notebook and wrote one final entry. "They called me a ghost. Maybe they were right, but ghosts don't haunt out of anger. They haunt to remind the living to listen." She closed the book, placed it beside the old cartridge casing, and sat by the fire until dawn. Because some wars aren't meant to be won. They're meant to be witnessed. And sometimes, the loudest victory is silence that refuses to die. What happens when a soldier finally runs out of wars to fight? For Kira Thorne, that question lingered longer than any echo of gunfire. The Yukon winter returned the same way the war had begun, quietly, like it was always waiting. Snow covered the roof in thick white layers. The river slowed to ice. Days blurred into shades of gray and silver. Inside the cabin, the firelight flickered across Mason's carved wood figures. Small things, simple things. A wolf, a rifle, a feather. Symbols of what they'd lost or maybe what they'd found again. Kira sat at the table, oil lamp casting long shadows across a map she no longer needed. Her fingers traced old routes like the veins of a life she'd outgrown. Afghanistan, Bennington, the valley where she'd made that shot. Each mark was a ghost, and together they formed the outline of the person she used to be. Mason stirred from sleep on the cot behind her. "You're awake again," he murmured. "Habit," she said. He smiled weakly. "You could try unlearning it." "I tried once," she replied. "Didn't take." He didn't argue. Some habits were armor, and armor, no matter how heavy, kept you breathing. That morning they found animal tracks near the river, fresh, deep, leading toward the woods. Mason followed them with his rifle, cautious. Kira stayed behind, splitting wood, the rhythm clean and deliberate. Each strike of the axe echoed, like punctuation to the silence they'd built. She thought about the people who'd called her things, soldier, sniper, ghost, survivor, and realized none of them fit anymore. She wasn't those titles. She was just someone who'd finally stopped trying to prove she belonged anywhere. When Mason returned, snow clung to his coat. "Wolf tracks," he said. "Big one might circle back." She nodded. "Let it." He grinned. "You've changed, Thorne." "No," she said softly. "I just stopped pretending change was a choice." Later, when the sun dipped behind the ridge, they sat outside with coffee gone cold. The sky turned the color of smoke, and the world looked almost clean. Mason spoke first. "You ever think about telling someone your story, just once, start to finish?" She thought about it. About all the people who'd want to hear about the female sniper who exposed corruption, the young soldier who took the shot that shook the world. Then she shook her head. People don't listen to stories. They listen to versions of themselves inside stories. Mine doesn't fit anyone's version. He nodded slowly. "Then write it anyway." She smiled faintly. "You think anyone would read it?" "Maybe not now," he said. "But one day someone will find your words and need them." That night under candlelight, she opened her notebook for the last time. The first pages were filled with coordinates, mission logs, names. Then came thoughts, questions, regrets. Now, blank pages stared back like forgiveness. She began to write. If someone finds this, know that war is not about enemies. It's about choices that carve pieces off you until you forget what whole felt like. They'll tell you courage is the moment you pull the trigger. They're wrong. Courage is what comes after when you live with what you've done. Stillness isn't peace. It's endurance disguised as grace. She stopped writing, listened. Outside, the wolves howled again, a harmony older than human guilt. She closed her eyes, let it fill the cabin. Maybe, she thought, this was the world's way of saying you can stop now. Spring returned quietly, melting the snow until the river ran free again. Mason started repairing the roof. Kira took to long walks through the forest, unarmed. The silence didn't feel empty anymore. It felt earned. One afternoon, she followed a trail to a ridge overlooking the valley. The view stretched endless: pine, water, sky. She sat there for hours, knees pulled close, wind tugging at her hair. She didn't think of war. She thought of small things: the boys' laughter from the convoy, the farmer's kindness in the desert, the way her grandfather's voice softened whenever he said her name. For the first time in years, those memories did ache. They warmed. She whispered, "Thank you," to no one and everyone at once. Months passed. Mason grew thinner, his laughter shorter. The cough started as a whisper and ended in blood. They both knew what it meant, but neither said it aloud. One night he sat by the fire, shaking hands wrapped around a mug. "I always figured I'd go out in the field," he said, "not fade in a cabin." Kira smiled softly. "Maybe this is better." "Why?" "Because it means you won." He chuckled weakly. "If this is victory, it's overrated." "No," she said, "it's honest." He looked at her for a long moment, then said quietly, "Promise me something. When I go, don't bury me. Scatter me by the river. Let the water carry me somewhere no one can find." She nodded. "You'll keep moving then." "Always," he said. "That's what soldiers do." When the end came, it was quiet. Morning light through frost, steam from his last breath fatting before she could catch it. She closed his eyes, whispered, "You made it home," and sat beside him until the fire burned down. That afternoon she kept her promise. The river was cold, the current slow. She poured his ashes into the water, watching them swirl and vanish. The sound was gentle, like a secret finally exhaled. When she walked back to the cabin, she didn't cry. She just sat on the porch and listened to the forest breathe. The world kept moving, and she somehow stayed still without feeling trapped. Years drifted by. The cabin aged with her, wood splitting, roof sagging but still standing. Visitors were rare. Occasionally hikers passed through, leaving behind stories they didn't know she already understood. Sometimes they asked about the quiet woman who lived by the river. Most said she was kind, though her eyes carried whether no one could predict. One day a young woman stopped by, backpack heavy, voice shy. "Are you Kira Thorne?" she asked. Kira looked up from chopping wood. "Who's asking?" The girl smiled nervously. "My grandmother served with someone named Mason. She said if I ever felt lost, I should find the woman who knew how to disappear." Kira studied her face, youth, uncertainty, a familiar flicker of searching. "You found her," she said. The girl's eyes widened. "You're real." Kira handed her a mug of water. "Most ghosts are." They sat by the fire that night. The girl spoke about joining the army, about wanting to make a difference. Kira listened, smiled when she paused. When the girl asked, "Do you ever regret it?" Kira took her time before answering. "I regret the silence more than the noise, but I don't regret surviving it." The girl nodded, understanding more than she should at her age. Before leaving, she asked, "What should I remember if I remember nothing else?" Kira looked at the fire. "That doing right will hurt more than doing wrong, but one pain ends, the other doesn't." The girl left at dawn, footprints vanishing into dew. Kira watched until she disappeared, then whispered to the trees, "Don't let her make my mistakes. Let her find her own." Years later, another winter. Kira's hair turned silver. Her hands shook more often, but her eyes stayed sharp. She spent her days tending the cabin, feeding the birds, writing less but feeling more. One morning, she sat by the river with her notebook open to the last page. She wrote slowly, "If someone ever asks what became of Kira Thorne, tell them she lived long enough to understand that the world doesn't need perfect soldiers. It needs honest ones. Tell them she learned that ghosts aren't cursed, they're chosen. Because some stories need to walk beside the living until they learn to listen. Tell them she finally stopped waiting for peace and started becoming it." She set the notebook down, closed her eyes, and breathed. One deep, steady inhale, the kind her grandfather taught her to take before a shot. When the wind rose, it sounded like applause. When it faded, the forest fell quiet again. Inside, the fire burned low. Outside, the river carried on. Somewhere far away, files marked classified gathered dust in forgotten drawers. History, as always, moved on without asking permission. But legends have no expiration date. Days later, hikers found the cabin empty. The door unlocked, the rifle clean, the notebook on the table beside a single cartridge casing engraved with one word: endure. They never found her body, just footprints in the snow leading to the river and ending at the water's edge. And for years after, people who walked that valley swore they sometimes heard a faint echo at dusk, steady, rhythmic, like the heartbeat between breaths. Maybe it was wind. Maybe it was memory. Or maybe it was her still watching, still guarding, still enduring. Because some wars don't end when the guns fall silent. Some live on in the hearts of those who chose to aim at truth instead of hate. And sometimes dignity doesn't die. It simply becomes the silence that refuses to fade.